We come now to item number 15, which is the last referral from audit and risk. And I'm going to ask Daniel Newman to move that, and maybe Shane Henderson second that as a member of the committee. Just before we get into this discussion, I want to draw everybody's attention to an email from our Chief Executive yesterday. I know most of you have probably cleared it, but in dealing with this issue, it has become a pattern for some aspects of the media to personalise down to the name of individuals who may have lost their life. The family of the particular individual that's now been mentioned several times in the media finds this incredibly distressing, and I'd just like to draw attention to the Chief Executive's memo. He's raised it with the media as well, and I'm sure they'll take the advice on board, but it is better not to raise the name of an individual that is now deceased and add to the pain that is causing to the family. So could I just ask members in any discussion on this item to follow that advice from our Chief Executive. So if I can ask Patricia and N, don't know whether Patricia is here. Is Patricia here? She's behind us. To come to the table, N to stay at the table, and Jim maybe to give some introductory comments on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I commissioned this review at the end of what was obviously an incredibly challenging year of 2020. Obviously, we understand the financial pressures, the demand that brought in terms of workload, and some of the shifting community expectations that Councillor Cooper, you referred to just a moment ago. And in response to that, we commissioned this review in November. The work was undertaken between January and March of this year, and the report was issued a couple of weeks ago. That review was led by Ian as Acting General Manager of Health and Safety, but it was very comprehensive in nature, and it involved many interviews and forums to gather input from individuals, from groups, staff networks, and importantly from our unions directly. The review and its report were also reviewed externally by Debbie Francis, who was the author of the Parliamentary Services Review. In summary, I would say the key findings from the review are that many staff feel well supported, and in fact in our most recent staff engagement survey, the score that we got when asked that question was 7.7, which puts us around the mid-range of local government organisations globally. However, some staff do not feel as well supported as they should, and the key drivers of that relate to workload, unacceptable behaviour, a sense of organisational change, and a question around whether the capability and capacity exists in our leadership to guide our wellbeing agenda in the way that we think is necessary. The recommendations from the review fall into three categories that kind of align to those findings. Firstly, that wellbeing needs to be a critical part of our culture, much more strongly than perhaps it has been in the past. Secondly, that we need to invest in our leadership capability and capacity to be able to understand and deal with and sponsor wellbeing in our organisation at every level. And thirdly, that we strengthen the tools and resources in our organisation to support people being able to access the things that are necessary in support of their wellbeing. There are 30-odd specific recommendations in the review. It's a comprehensive piece of work. It's quite bold in its approach. And of course, it signals the beginning of the work that we have to do. It's not the end point. It will take some time and determination for us to deliver on all of the promises of that review. but the executive leadership team and I are up for that challenge. So I commend the report.
Thank you very much, Jim. Ian or Patricia, is there any comments that you'd like to add to that? That's fine. Now, I'm conscious, councillors, that we have had some discussion on this at the All Councillors meeting, but I will open it up for questions and then comments, and we'll begin with Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just wonder if you could just help me out a little bit with this, the latest staff engagement survey that's in Part B of the stakeholder feedback. So it's 5674 employees, so that's maybe 60% of our employees, perhaps, in terms of a return to start off with.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Watson. No, that's 84% of our full-time workforce.
Okay, so that's a very good
yes,
response.
It's a participation rate that we're very happy with, and we're looking to maintain or better in the upcoming engagement surveys.
Okay, so just in terms of this classification of promoters and detractors, an overall response there. So we have 1, 2, 4, 5 defined as being detractors, and with the explanation down below what that means in terms of measuring employees' satisfaction level. So that runs at about 22% then of the people who have actually replied to the survey then, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right. I think I probably want to just highlight, if I can explain a little further, so we have detractors, and so people will complain about an organisation and they're detractors. They're often the folk that were highlighted as having a really difficult experience in our organisation were much fewer than that. They were perhaps a subset, and we met a number of groups associated with perhaps people who feel that it's a real difficult area to work within. So I wouldn't read that the detractors are the same, have the same level of feeling that perhaps have a very low well-being in our organisation. I think New Zealanders complain a bit, and these are a good example of them.
That's helpful to know. I suppose it's quite a broad grouping, and certainly the inference from that word is not a complimentary one, but I take your point, Ian. And in terms of really getting people to engage openly and honestly in this, which of course is fundamental to the success or otherwise of the recommendations, I note the comments about the speak up process and the lack of trust that is perceived by a certain percentage of the workforce, and the notion of retribution and lack of confidentiality, which is not distinct to Auckland Council, but that's obviously a real concern for getting people to really put their hand up and tell what's happening. I noticed that one of the recommendations is to be considered as the possibility of an external agency or involvement in terms of encouraging a greater confidence in being able to speak up. Could you just perhaps give us a few details as to how you think that could involve, or what it might be, and how it would hopefully help this process?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, as it stands, speak ups can come through multiple channels. So they can come through our ER team, Employment Relations, our Health and Safety team, our People and Culture team. But what the review recommends is that in the interests of giving some staff who are worried about their confidentiality more confidence in that their confidentiality will be protected, that their privacy will be protected, is that we look at an external channel. And so the ELT are having a look at all of the recommendations, all 34 of them, on June the 11th, and some of them are more easily implementable, and that is one of them that we will consider.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll reserve my right to talk to this. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question is Councillor Afesor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a few questions. I just wanted to ask if we would consider a further report, like is there, do we want to, there's a number of implementation or parts for implementation here, but I guess to Jim, would you consider, say, another internal report like this in the next 3 to 5 years?
Thanks, Councillor. Look, I think our focus at the moment will be on delivering on the intent of this review. I should point out that as we set about the implementation of this, of the recommendations in this report, we will be setting up a challenger group, a staff challenger group, who can work with us to give advice as to how we might best deliver on the recommendations or improve them as we go about delivering on them. So some of them might evolve a little bit and improve as we implement them. We propose to report back on a regular basis. We'll determine what regularity makes the most sense on our progress with respect to delivering on the review. We will, of course, continue to monitor how people feel about health, safety and well-being in the workplace through the regular engagement surveys. And I imagine at some point in time in the future, we will go back and assess the extent to which the work that we've done has made the difference that we want it to make. It may be some point in the future where we undertake another and different review. That could be the case, but that should be guided, I think, by the feedback that we get from people along the way of implementing these recommendations.
Cool, thank you. And just one other question, Mayor. I'm interested to see, and probably more for Patricia, interested to see how Hau Water, the reference to the Te Whare Tapawhā model, how that might play a part in our recruitment activities, if we can see a line going into how we recruit people into the organisation.
Without sounding like an HR speak person, it's a really important contribution to our what we call our EVP, our employee value proposition. If our reputation as an organisation is that we look after our people and that we have their well-being, not just physical, but their social, spiritual, mental well-being at the heart of how we treat our people, it will really help us, I think, to attract talent to the organisation.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. I'm just reading the report on the threat made to Panuku staff based on the trial of street furniture or some such referred to police yesterday. Online threat over road closures. And in the article, Panuku state the increasing aggression with regard to some of those street projects, and we've seen examples of it around this table. I think my question is, how do we interact with police, both at elected member level and at staff level, when something crosses a line, and who makes the decision that this should go immediately to police, and where does it go? And just before you answer, Ian, it was just to say that Josephine Bartley and I have had convoluted dealings with police over various things, usually threats or abuse online or face-to-face. But it's really hard. You have to find a police station, you have to go in, you have to take up all that time. And I've always wanted a streamlined process for that. So that's my plea.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the recommendations here concerns this organisation's a clear statement from our organisation, from the Chief Executive, from ELT, about what type of behaviour is unacceptable and where a staff member or indeed anyone else may withdraw in the light of that. So that's our first move. That's one of the early recommendations we expect to see coming through quite quickly. That will need to be associated with some collateral, notices and so forth, but also some training for our staff and for our people managers. We're also we'll be setting up regular sessions with the police. There are 3 police districts across Auckland, so we'll be meeting with each of those in a combined group. So we've managed to get that together. The first meeting is scheduled for another week or so, and it'll be how we can involve the police in those sorts of issues that arise. They're aware of particularly the physical abuse that does take place. There's also some training for our own staff. You may be surprised, but our own staff often believe it's perfectly reasonable to be abused because it comes with the job. And there's a sort of an acceptance that's grown up over many years. So if I'm an animal management officer and I go onto a property, it's just part of my role to expect a very strong reaction. So look, there are issues we need to deal with our own people as to what's acceptable or not. But look, the streamlined process that you're talking about in terms of responding to those issues, we're working to set that up, and it will be part of the implementation program for this.
Yeah, and a comment from Jim Stabak.
Councillor, just in response to the specific question around Panuku, I met this morning with the chief executives of all of the CCOs, and obviously the review and its report have been provided to them as well. They each have their own health and safety programs, but they also are very positive about the potential to incorporate into their own health and safety programs the recommendations from our review, which will include things like Ian has referred to. So how do staff extract themselves from confrontational situations when appropriate, those sorts of things. In addition, Patricia and I have recently talked about how we elevate our relationship with the police to a kind of more meaningful one. It's not one that I've focused on in the time that I've been here, but it's certainly one that we know is important, and so we're proposing to do some work on that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Hurls.
Kia ora. Thank you, and thank you once again, Jim, for this. It's quite a stark report. The just on the elected member behaviour, the power difference, the long list of behaviours that some staff experience from elected members across local boards and governing body. And to Ian's point is that many tell me that it's part of the job. We know we're going to get treated poorly by some elected members and by the members of the public. What are, and it's even happened, I've heard, since this review's come out, still that behaviour. So what kind of tools can we give? Because I've asked for years, what kind of tools, whether it's staff can walk away or there's like a, that's enough, or memos just go to local board, that particular member or something now, and it's actually on their agenda, staff refuse to turn up due to behaviour or something. Because it seems like there's this kind of still neutrality around, oh well, the staff just had to deal with it. So I'm still not really clear what the tools are that we're empowering staff to walk away or not turn up.
Well, we'll partly address that this afternoon when we look at the Members' Code of Conduct, because you'll be aware that we will be addressing greater clarity around the appropriateness of behaviour by elected members towards staff. So that will be in our own hands and the decision we make this afternoon. But Phil, you've come to the table to address that question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, firstly, thanks for the question, because it shows an awareness of a genuine issue. The fact is we're working on this right now, so it's evolving. We have taken steps because I think the situation's gotten worse in reasonably recent times. Certainly there have been a number of high profile or a number of incidents that are concerning. To the specific suggestions, yes, we've taken we've got some code of conduct complaints underway right now. That's a formal process, relates to the item later in the agenda. we've taken the step of writing and setting out very clearly expectations and where we consider behaviour hasn't been okay to some specific members, and we've issued some direction to staff in certain areas who have needed to deal with some of this, that it is okay to leave, and some guidance to more senior officers to take care in planning for situations where more junior staff are dealing with contentious issues in, you know, where there's a pattern of behaviour around a particular issue. I won't go into specifics. I've specifically asked Louise Mason to prepare a formal protocol where we give staff licence to extract themselves from meetings and situations where it's going sideways.
Thank you for that. I guess I'll wait for the speaking turn on that. But the other thing around the comments that came up a lot about restructure or constant change, and I know due to emergency budget and others, there is still a lot of that going on. But what kind of confidence, because it's very operational, we set a budget and then we don't, for good reason, have a lot of control over who stays employed or how things are restructured. But what kind of confidence do we have that, at least for a while, there could be a plateau of constant change? Because it seems like sometimes, in my opinion, 6 months of lack of productivity in a whole department could be avoided by maybe, I don't know. Is there a better way to do things than full restructures and reapplying for jobs and all that, which does seem to put a lot of pressure and stress onto our staff?
Oh, look, in response, Councillor, a couple of kind of caveats. One is that we will never be in a position where we can say that there won't be change. The other caveat is that I accept that there are times when we reach for the structural change lever, when in fact we can bring about change through other means. So with those two things in mind, I think that there are a couple of things that we can do to help our staff be more comfortable about the fact that there will be change and that it will be well thought through. And with things like the op model review that we've talked to you about and the service review as part of that, you know, I think it's important that when the time is right, we're open and transparent with our people, and that most importantly, they understand the why. So where we often go awry with change is that people don't understand why. And the other reason is they don't know that it's coming. And, you know, with things like the op model review, we can be more planned and we can be open and transparent about when, and we can be clear about why. And I think that those two things can really help our staff be more comfortable about change.
And last question, thanks, Jed. Just on, and it's once again probably too operational, but I feel like it's relevant. Is there enough flexibility in the organisation, or are you looking at working with the unions, or to fix certain things that I feel that I hear from staff that, you know, permanent secondments, acting positions for 2 or 3 years, doing roles or double roles without being properly remunerated. Is there a way that, because it seems like our structure is so like, well, we'll keep you in that position for 2 years, but then we have to go out, spend a whole lot of time putting it out to the market, and then you reemploy the same person anyway, where that's a lot of stress. I know that's very operational, but it's quite a common theme. Do you have the flexibility to just go, yep, you're in that role and we can give you the right pay? It's been 9 months or whatever. Like, I don't understand that from a governor, how we affect that kind of change.
Yes, so we're conscious of some of those things that hold us up. And, you know, without getting into the detail, Councillor, there are 2 things underway that I think are really important. One is a review of how we do our recruitment, and having a look at our recruitment policies. Now, I will say that because of the emergency budget and in those times, we did put in place a number of rules that some of our people leaders would have considered quite constraining. We have started to lift some of those now, and we are also doing an end-to-end review of our recruitment processes because it takes too long and it's too cumbersome. The second thing is a remuneration review. Now, that's a really big piece of work, but at its heart, it's about the ELT having confidence that we are pitching ourselves at the right place compared to the market so that we can both retain and attract the right people.
Thank you. Those matters are, of course, as the councillor has pointed out, operational. I think it's appropriate to ask the questions in general terms. Just to remind everybody, it's not appropriate for us to get involved in specific cases and stand between staff and management. That would be inappropriate, and I'd advise any councillor against that. Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you very much. I just want to pick up on the idea of perhaps going, staff being able to go external, and they might feel a bit more comfortable approaching an external agency rather than an internal one. Do we still have that whistleblower number? I remember a few years ago, might have been last term, there was a whistleblower number put in for Auckland Council. Are you aware of that?
Yeah. We certainly comply with the Whistleblowers Act, but we don't, not to my knowledge, Councillor says, have we had a whistleblower number. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, okay, so in relation to integrity.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Through the Chair, I think the Councillor is referring to the 0800 integrity number maintained by the Risk and Assurance Unit, and that is the whistleblower number. And that has been in place for a number of years.
Yeah, and just the purpose of that number in terms of 0800 integrity, who's that for use for and for what purpose?
It is one of the speak up channels. It can be used for a variety of things, but it's actually publicised as also as a whistleblower number should any staff member want to contact us about any particular concern that they have. And it's completely independent from council operations.
I don't know if that might be helpful, Patricia, in terms of picking up on that, perhaps existing channel. Yeah, I just want to clarify that.
Yes, so the one difference that we might implement is that the 0800 integrity number is answered by our own people. So if we wanted to, as the review suggests, we would go a step further and have a purely external firm or provider handle some, have that as an option too.
So, because I'm not quite clear, what would be the actual, so I understand it going external and perhaps people feel a lot more comfortable with that. So what would be the difference between the two, the number that's been proposed that Patricia's talking about, that going to an external agency, and the use of 0800 integrity? What's the difference?
Well, the difference is the external number is purely external. It gives our staff another option. It gives our staff, by giving them another option, it gives them, for those staff who have got concerns, a sense of comfort and security that it is their concern is being handled externally.
So would we need to keep the internal number, in your opinion, 0800 integrity? That's what I'm trying to figure out, or do you need some time to consult on that between yourselves?
Yes, look, we'll think about it, but I think, Councillor, that it's important that our staff feel they can go to a number of places. So if they feel that Mark and his team, Risk and Assurance, are a source that are a channel that they're comfortable with, then, that's good. If they feel that their HR business partner is someone they're comfortable with, their PSA rep, their health and safety rep, then their people leader, I think that at the heart of this, we're wanting people to feel that they can speak up and that if they want, their confidentiality can be protected.
I guess the only concern I had is that perhaps the 0800 integrity isn't well understood and might need some extra promotion as part of the process. Okay, thank you.
And we're also, of course, like every other organisation, bound by the Protected Disclosures Act in that regard. Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Mine was a comment. Mine's a comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, and thank you, Jim, for leading this work and for all those involved in the report. I think it's really important that it happened, and it does concern me how quickly it gets turned from being about the staff onto other, the focus gets kind of muddied, and we really need to focus on the fact that this is about the well-being of staff. So I had a very similar question to Councillor Hills about how the recommendations talk about that it's managing kind of the effects of organisational change, when actually the problem is the constant organisational change is actually the problem and the cause of staff well-being being impacted. So I think that was answered, but I think that we've got to recognise that the impact of just constant restructurings, and that there are staff members who've kind of been through 10 or more restructurings, and kind of their resilience is challenged every time, and they wear it like a badge of honour, and whether that's actually a good approach as an organisation. But I think I did get a response. So thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't need to comment further other than just very happy to receive this, and thank you for the work.
Thank you very much. Now we go now to comments, and then we'll finish this item and we'll have a chance to break for lunch, remembering we've still got quite a big agenda ahead of us beyond that. We start with Councillor John Watson.
Mr Mayor, and certainly echo those sentiments in thanking the CEO for doing this. It does take a little bit of courage to open yourself up in the way you have there, and that's to be commended. Otherwise, things never change. And similarly, with the review team, one of the criticisms you leave yourself open to when it's an internal review, that, there's a degree of management perspective that overrides other things, but I don't think that's the case in this. So I congratulate you on that. I also acknowledge at the outset the CEO's commentary to the organisation as a whole, and that is that, on the average, people are doing okay. I guess my concern as an elected person is to do with the people who aren't doing okay. And there is enough information in this report, which, as I said, has been refreshingly frank, to raise a few alarm bells. Now, Ian explained the notion of detractors as opposed to promoters or proponents, whatever you want to call them, but that sort of 22% figure is actually in keeping what we've heard in previous reports in previous years about the health and well-being concerns of people in this organisation, which has been running at about 20%, and that's going back to 2018. That is concerning. That is a significant statistic, particularly in a big organisation. And when I look at the report as a whole, particularly the feedback from the workers, if I can use that old-fashioned term, then there are a couple of ancillary issues that definitely need to be addressed. And I think probably for me one of the most salient points was the one at 37, where it said most of the feedback received was about the need for greater congruence between what is said across the organisation about concern for well-being and the day-to-day reality for staff and teams working on the front line. One of the realities of any workforce is how what people say and their policies and everything meshes up with what actually happens. And anyone that's been in any sort of workplace knows there can be a massive disparity between all the avenues that are supposedly open to you and how the game actually rolls out on the ground. And that's really what concerns me. And that's why I did zero in on this trust and the speak up process. Obviously, trust is fundamental to this whole thing. So you can have all the words in the world that you like, but it's remarked in the report, it's the intangible of whether people really trust you or not, and the leadership that really takes the lead in that trust. We know from the commentary here that that there is a concern from people about speaking up, and that's understandable. And it's understandable because of the unique vulnerability of Auckland Council employees. There is one gig in town as far as council goes for a lot of people, and that is the Auckland Council. In legacy days, people could go to 7 or 8 councils. They can't now. Sure, there are some occupations that are in demand, but for a lot there aren't. They're incredibly vulnerable to being, if they lose a job here or something happens, that's it. They're in big trouble. So I think in light of that unique vulnerability, it is really important that there's confidence in people being able to speak up and not necessarily just having this avenue or that avenue where they are totally secure and they genuinely feel that something will come of it. And that also goes to the next statement there about the importance of involving the staff in developing solutions, which again is very aptly commented that just simply telling people what the solution is from a management perspective can be quite different from, from the workers at the bottom of the tree. So I guess, for my position, which is an unusual one, I'll be honest, I'm a governor, and like most governors, I've got no idea. My interaction with staff is, like most people, is largely limited to what appears in here, and statistically, that's a very small number of the organisation. So we've got this rather unusual position where, on the one hand, we've got this title as officers under the health and safety, which gives us certain responsibilities. On the other hand, we're detached from that kind of operational governance role. And then on the other hand, we're actually part of the staff in a very real term, and we have our own issues. So I noticed that there is a reference there to the health and well-being of councillors. Well, I would suggest that hasn't been addressed here satisfactorily, and there's good reason for that because you're looking at the staff. But I just tag that as a concern that I've got. But I'll just finish off by thanking you, Jim, for opening the organisation up like this. And I'm certainly hopeful and confident that if anyone can restore genuine trust and transform that culture where it's needed, it's you. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. And yeah, thank you, Jim and Patricia and Ian and team for pushing this through. Thank you, Jim, for your leadership on this and, being very open and transparent out there with the media and the public and the staff about what we expect, what you expect, and also what is come out from it. I think there's a lot to learn. I think there's a lot we already knew. I am actually quite defensive of Auckland Council all the time. I think a lot of staff are too. So a lot of us don't like to speak badly about the organisation because we, I assume, stand and staff apply for jobs and work here for very long periods of time, often because they believe in giving back to the city, giving back to the council, actually getting good stuff done. So often people won't speak up because they don't want to put the council in a negative light. When the day this wellbeing report came out, someone wrote on Twitter that their wellbeing has markedly improved since they left council, and that was quite sad to read that. They also said that me, and I'm not, just shining a light on me, but was the only person in the whole time they worked here to thank them for their work, and I thought that was quite a shocking thing for someone to say. So, even down to just appreciating what our staff do and every now and then saying thanks can make a big difference. I do want to highlight what we're in control of and what local board members are in control of as well. I don't want to labour on it too much, but it does say in the points from 56 to 59, staff referred to the power imbalance between staff and elected representatives and feeling of having nowhere to turn when they feel a line has been crossed. And that employees must be given guidance and support how to deal with this when an elected member, when the relationship between an elected member and staff deteriorates into a negative one. It also says that staff supported open and unfettered discussion, but suggested there were times where the discussion became a personal attack on the presenter or the presenter was treated disrespectfully. There were also times the staff felt personally attacked by us, and one contributor even talked of presenting on difficult and potentially divisive issues, but elected representatives often engaged disrespectfully or not appropriately. Some feedback outlined how elected representatives consider it appropriate to treat staff with disdain and contempt, in words of one contributor. There were individuals who were not called out for this behaviour or censured by chairs, so that's on me as a chair and other chairs as well. There were strong views that staff were held accountable for the behaviour through the council's charter, elected representative code of conduct, but it was ineffective, and I'd agree on that too. And I'm not sure that the new code of conduct will be effective either, because it's such a long process. And that's why I keep talking about the tools that maybe staff can be given in that moment, in that time, to pull away, to step back, to send a memo to that local board or committee, as opposed to turning up if the behaviour continues, because it's actually not appropriate when we embarrass staff, challenge staff. I think what we're doing here now, and I think maybe that hopefully local boards can take that on, is where staff are able to move away from the table and feel that we're not directing our comments, and often accidentally or on purpose staring right at the staff while we debate passionately about an issue. I really want to see this action continue, and I think all of us have to keep honest to this and ensure that our executive and Jim and the team keep honest to it too. And I'm sure staff will continue to talk to us, because I know that staff are really proud to work for this organisation, but there are things that happen here, and it's constant change, it's constant, open to media scrutiny, public scrutiny, being yelled at, abused, physically attacked, as we see in our audit and risk reports. And it's just not okay. And I think all of us, we don't have to be Pollyanna about it, but I think it is about time that if we do have issues with staff or reports, that we could take that offline and go through respectful ways, as opposed to publicly denigrating our staff. And I think that local boards need a clearer direction on this too, because they're not around this table debating it, or maybe hearing from Jim in a personal way how this has affected staff. So I think this is really important, but there's a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Just want to make some comments and encourage some things. The first thing that I'm particularly supportive of is having some external recourse. And the test for me around that was in a previous term of council some time ago, when there were a whole lot of people that lost their jobs that I was directly familiar with across any number of tiers. And it was incredibly distressing for those members of staff, and they felt they had nowhere to go. And to echo the comment that Councillor Watson made, Auckland Council was the only gig in town, and many of those people had to leave town. So that was a real test that I was familiar with, and really emphasised the need for some form of external entity that they could communicate with, and the ongoing concern that they had, some of these people, that they might not be able to reapply for jobs because their name was marked. So they knew, because they'd been told, that they would not only were they losing their job, but don't waste your time reapplying. So, these things happen, and that was really bad. The other thing that I think that Jim alludes to in here, and it's really good, Jim, is the need for support for councillors, because we get on the front end of things. We can have sometimes hundreds of emails in a day from various quarters around issues, and we obviously sometimes need support. The other thing that does concern me, and I would encourage, and I do raise this, is around how we're interacting with communities. And for me, I don't see much that in a strategic way is around the things that I call civic education, civic pride, civic places, civic strategy. I see these things in other cities when I visit them, and they often manifest themselves in all sorts of ways. But when I ask those questions around how they manifest themselves in our city, I often find them lacking. And as we actively make cuts across places and people and various things, I think there's a real danger that we retract further. And there are some very real things that we can do to turn that situation around. And I think that there are useful tools to use. One of the things that you can do in marketing is to employ things like focus groups, so that if you realise that something is happening, and that can be internally, it can also be externally, that you get some feedback. And often the feedback from a focus group, and it doesn't have to be a very big focus group, can be representative of a more significant issue out there. And I certainly see issues in communities where those communities often don't feel that they're being adequately listened to, in instances where they do try to engage, often for one reason or another, they may feel closed out, and bad stuff happens, particularly if it impacts on their livelihoods. And I'm referring to individuals, but also businesses. And that has been especially accentuated over, of course, the problems we've had during COVID, where it's been very hard for people in businesses and employment. So I think this is a really good start, Jim, and I'm very encouraged. And as I say, there are some things that I would further encourage.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fessel-Collins.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just trying to start the video again. Awesome. Hey, look, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Jim and Patricia and Ian. And I know that Phil is at the table as well. I really welcome this report. I think it was a really good step to take, and I acknowledge that you didn't have a lot of time, but what you've come back with is really quite insightful. Some parts of it are saddening, but I'm hopeful that we're able to get the tools in place and some steps in place that are going to help all of us. There may be some training and support for us as elected members as well along the way. I think we've taken a few small steps that have really helped. I remember the day I think we were in a workshop at the time, and I loosely made the suggestion that perhaps it would be a good idea for presenting officers to step away from the table when it was time for us to enter into the debate. And then straight after that, we went into a finance committee meeting, and Chair Simpson picked it up straight away and tried it. And I thought the fact that something as small as that was picked up immediately means that we can have some small steps that are just going to offer some buffer to staff, some support to staff, especially those who have to present. So I think that's been a really good step. I was thinking as well, as I listened to some of what Councillor Hills and Councillor Watson were saying, I was reflecting on the time I was a public servant about 10 years ago at the Ministry of Education. And I remember a time, and whilst I don't want to get into too many operational things, I remember the time where my contract was about to be either renewed or ended. And I felt I had nowhere to go because I had a regional manager who told me at the urinal that my contract wouldn't be renewed and that I was on my way out the door. And it probably goes to give you some reference as to the kind of employee they saw me at the time. But the point I'm making there is, where do you go to speak up? Who do you have? And I know that this is going back to when I was a public servant about 10 years ago, but I think it's really important that staff feel like there's someone they can turn to. There's a process that they can rely on and depend on that's going to act on their behalf in an honest and genuine way. I wrote about that experience because as a person who eventually left that particular department, went to MSD, it was something that I've held on to for a long time, and perhaps has led to me having a perhaps lower level of confidence in the way I was managed. And look, I understand that there are people who are in the civil service and the public service in general who might be feeling that too. So it's important that we understand what our employees are going through, whilst acknowledging, Mayor, that your words are correct, that it's not our role to get in the way between management and staff. The report talks about a governance group, and Mayor, I thought I might cheekily just say in the public forum here that I would be really interested in being part of that governance group. I know that group's going to be established and looked at over the next little while, but I think that governance group's going to be really important, similar to, I've forgotten the name of the other group where you're going to have staff representatives and the union present. I think it's important for us as a governance group both to hear from what the staff are going through and what they're reporting back, as well as understanding what elected members are feeling and sensing and going through themselves. So in all that, I just want to say I welcome the report. I'm really I'm hopeful in the change that is possible, because I think we're a great city and Auckland Council's a great place to be. I really enjoy being part of council, and I just hope that our ongoing discussion as elected members in particular will always be robust, but it will always be respectful. And I think those are some key elements to our discussion that we need to keep in mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Jim, firstly, thank you and congratulations for starting this process off. So, mihi to you. I also am going to make an apology to Phil Wilson, an apology to Patricia, and also to you again as well, Jim. The reason that apology is in 2010, when I was humbled along with members around this committee to be elected onto the new Auckland Council, I started to get several emails around how the people at Manukau City Council were feeling with the amalgamation, the stress, the hurt they were feeling. Those emails are still continuing these days, but not in the light as they were in 2010. The reason I'm apologising to you three is because you three, and especially going back to Phil, I needed somebody that I could trust, that I could pass on the feelings from all the emails that I was receiving in 2010. I needed somebody that I could trust and talk to get a pathway open for their voice to be heard. So Phil, I apologise to you because you were somebody I was ringing continually when I was receiving those emails. So I thank you, but also apologise for the cause. I then found with Patricia as somebody that I could trust. And then she ended up getting the phone calls around people who were complaining around how they felt, how they were treated at Auckland Council. And she is somebody as well that I trust. Jim, when you came on board, I know the first meeting we had, and thank you for that. And I said to you at that first meeting, and said to you, look, I need to trust you because I don't like anybody who BS's me. And you said, I will never do that. And that's exactly happened. And I think it was about 2 or 3 days later, I called you because there was a complaint that I received in an email of a staff member who was being bullied. And he didn't know where to go. So I went to you, you went to Patricia, and that was dealt with. So I apologise because I will continue to ring you, Phil Wilson, and Patricia because I trust you three explicitly. Your Worship, I'm glad that this has happened. I look forward to item 17 because what I'm hearing around this table is reflected in item 17. So I'm assuming that that particular item will go through without any dissent around the code of conduct, because that's exactly what I'm hearing. We are supportive of the way forward, and I applaud that. And so I will also have a little mihi and corridor around item 17, but in regards to this particular item, support and say thank you again, Jim, to you, to your team, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, because it is around our staff and it is around the safety of our staff and also the opportunity for us as elected members to ensure that we adhere and always have in the back of our minds that we should think about our staff and the families when we end up making decisions around budgets. Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Lastly, Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll be brief. But I just wanted to personally just thank Jim for your work. I think this is really important. In fact, one of the most important things that this council does actually is to make sure that people are safe when we work for it. Because, you know, I've always felt that we should set a goal to have our workers and our contractors feel huge amounts of pride in their work, to enjoy their work, to appreciate that what they're doing makes our city a better place to live. Look, I don't want to muddy the waters here because the focus is rightly on staff, but I do need to echo Councillor Watson in that our well-being is also an issue. The saddest thing is that we all have stories about being threatened with physical violence, getting death threats for our jobs. We all do. I think that we just need to back each other up on this. We need to report these incidents when we get them, and we need to make sure that they're taken seriously because too often they are pushed under the rug, in my view. I wanted to add that there is a leadership role that we have to provide here in terms of the staff wellbeing report. We need to be uncompromising when it comes to staff being attacked, both online and offline. When it comes to how people are feeling, how disempowered they feel, etc., when they attack staff personally, frankly, I do not care. I don't care how you're feeling. You know, disempowerment is a problem that we all need to work on. That is crucial. That's a very important part of our jobs, but it's no excuse to attack individuals and threaten individuals. And it's for all of us to step in and say, look, that's not right. Even if they're our constituents, we need to step in and say that's not right. So, you know, no matter how you feel, we have a role here, and we need to be a police force for this as well. So just want to thank you again, Jim, for your work and your leadership.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll just say a couple of quick words. If Councillor Newman wants to conclude it, please indicate to us, Councillor. To add to the thanks that's been given to Jim for initiating this and the work that's been done by Patricia, Ian and Phil, I think all of our officers serve us very well, and in this report, I think it is a really important report. It's kind of a unique place to work, I guess, for our staff. The positive is the same sense of satisfaction that we have as councillors, that in working in this place we can make a difference, and that you know, we're not nobody's going to get rich by working at council. If you want to do that, you go to the private sector, but if you do want to make a difference, I've spoken to a lot of staff members and they feel that that's one of the satisfying aspects of their job. I think it's good that we had such a big participation in this survey, an 85% participation rate. That demonstrates in itself that our employees felt that there was a purpose and a reward for participating in the process. They didn't think it was a waste of time, they engaged with it, and I think that's good. And I think it's good that 80% of the employees felt well supported. That means that we're not the worst employer, but we're probably not the best either. We're somewhere in the middle, Jim tells me, but what we'd like to be is an exemplary employer, that we were providing a great working place so that people felt thanked for the work that they did and put themselves into it. I know that in the occasions when I've worked for an employer, if I thought my work was acknowledged and thanked, I worked that much harder because there was a purpose for doing it. If I thought that what my efforts were just ignored, well, where's the incentive to be the best you can in your job? The interesting thing about working for council is that you've got a threefold interface. You've got an interface with the public, and we expect our employees to be courteous and helpful to members of the public that approach them for information, but equally we insist that members of the public are respectful and courteous in reply, and there should be a zero tolerance approach to abuse and threats from the public, whether it's actually to our employees, our staff members, or to elected representatives. It is a two-way process. We've got to behave in a particular way, and we have the right to expect the public to behave in the same way back. Secondly, it's to elected representatives, and this report shows that there is an imbalance between particularly more junior staff members and elected representatives. And Councillor Philippine is quite right. We've got to walk the talk this afternoon. We've got a code of conduct that we need to renew. It sets out, I think very fairly, the behaviour that should be expected from us towards our employees. And we need to have a code of conduct that is clear, and we need to have a mechanism for sanctioning behaviour that does not meet the standard. So let's not just talk the good talk around here, let's make sure that that's reflected in the way in which we deal with our employees. And thirdly, there's the standard relationship that our employees have with management. And we expect our management to have the capability to be able to deal with the issues that will often come up, and that will be a role that Jim and his executive leadership team is responsible for, and they're showing willingness to do that. So I think this has been a valuable session, and I commend the comments that have been made around the table, and I would like now finally to pass to the mover of the motion, Councillor Daniel Newman, to have the last word. Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if I'm on screen, but I just wanted to echo the sentiments that have been reflected by a number of my colleagues. Local government reform in Auckland has limited the opportunity for people who desire an opportunity to work in the public service in Auckland to move from one unit of local government to another if they are dissatisfied with their current employer. That has been one of the downsides of local government reform dating back to 2010. Your Worship, I've had the opportunity to work in careers both in the public sector and the private sector, both in central government and in local government. I have to say, the most challenging workplace environments that I have worked in have always been in the public service. The most rewarding, certainly the most financially rewarding jobs I have held have been in the private sector, and that is where I always felt the most supported in my workplace. I think that the report that has been presented by Jim Stabbock, look, Jim Stabbock is a chief executive who enjoys my full support because I think he's really delivered a degree of transparency and honest advice, courageous advice in the short time that he has been in the role, which has really set him apart. And I think that this is part of that. So the report is difficult to consider because it really shines a light on some poor practices and room for improvement, but I think that it does serve the basis for improvements, and I acknowledge the comments from both Councillor Philippine and Your Worship in terms of the matter that we will consider after lunch. So I want to thank the officers for bringing this report to the governing body. It has been considered by the Audit and Risk Committee. And I look forward to the work that will take place led by the Chief Executive, but with all of us contributing in a complementary way to give effect to an improvement in morale and the staff climate in the time to come. Thank you. I too commend the item.
Thank you very much, Councillor. The recommendation is noting that we received the report and the opportunity that we have to act on our particular responsibility in this regard is this afternoon under item 17. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried and carried unanimously. It's now 1:16. Councillors, we've got some big items this afternoon, so can I suggest we break for lunch at this point and return at 1:45. Thank you very much.